It's really good to see you. I hope you had wonderful days yesterday in your local churches, and I do not take for granted the gift of the morning. I know we'll be together for about an hour, but for some of you, you drove an hour or more to be here, and you'll be doing the same. So to return. So I am very appreciative, and I know Jeff is too, of your presence and the gift of your time on a Monday morning. I want to start by expressing my appreciation to your district superintendent. Isn't he doing a great job? Yes. And he's doing double duty with the two districts and is doing it with grace. So, Jeff, thank you. It is a joy to serve alongside you. You have really excellent skills. You're a good communicator. You have a deep faith and you care for the clergy and churches in your district. So thank you so much. And I also want to express my appreciation to Chris Brown for hosting along with the staff here. Will you say thank you to them for hosting us here on this Monday morning? And Chris is here. He's up in the sound booth. So just so you know, he didn't skip this meeting. I'm going to be talking this evening and throughout this fall in districts here in Houston about hope. And there's a theme verse that I'm using. I love that verse. It comes from Romans 15:13, and you can see it on the screen. Will you read it with me? May the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, so that by the power of the Holy Spirit you may abound in hope. Paul wrote this letter to the Romans near the end of his ministry, and he gave a lot of words of wisdom, including this verse. And this verse really is a prayer that comes near the end of his letter to the Romans, and he talks about hope abounding. I want you to know that hope abounds in my heart this morning. And part of it is because of you and your churches and the ministry context where you serve. Not everybody in this room's in a local church most of the time. Some are in camping settings and others in Wesley Foundation settings and in other contexts. Your ministry is making a difference, and people's lives are being impacted. People are coming to know Christ or are deepening their relationship with Christ because of what you do. So hope abounds in my heart, and it's partially because of you. Did you know there are hope researchers, people who research what causes hope to be on the rise in the lives of people? And there are three factors that are understood to be essential for what's called a hope constellation. And I'll be referencing this and going more deeply into it this evening. But I want to lift up two of those factors. One is a vision. It's critical to have a vision. And we'll be talking about our vision here in Houston. And the second is that it's necessary to have pathways to the vision. And what I'm talking with you about this morning is the pathway and the pathways that we are installing and instilling here in the Houston Conference to work toward and to move us toward the vision that we have. If you'll take the handout, the 8x11, you'll see the vision that we have here in Houston. And I invite you to read that with me. It's short, and it is a powerful word picture. A conference of passionate spiritual leaders making disciples of Jesus Christ. Now, imagine that. A conference full passionate spiritual leaders making disciples of Jesus Christ. And some of those leaders are clergy, and some of those leaders are lay. And the focal point is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. You heard me introduce at annual conference definitions for passionate spiritual disciples and passionate spiritual leaders. Now, there's no question in my mind that everyone in this room is an authentic follower of Jesus Christ, and that's part of what it means to be a passionate spiritual disciple. You're authentic followers of Jesus Christ, but there's more to it when we talk about passionate spiritual disciple. And a passionate spiritual disciple is an authentic follower of Jesus Christ who is willing to be in accountable relationships related to growing spiritually, relationally, and missionally. Not every disciple of Jesus Christ is willing to be in an accountable relationship with a colleague, with a peer, where they're being held to growing relationally, missionally, and spiritually. I wonder how many persons in your ministry context are in those kinds of relationships. I think that's a fair question to ask. And if we are going to move toward that vision, it's important that there are more and more and more passionate spiritual disciples. And then you heard me talk about a passionate spiritual leader. That is simply a passionate spiritual disciple who is leading others, who has a shared mission with others. And a passionate spiritual leader comes from the pool of disciples. Not every passionate spiritual disciple is a passionate spiritual leader, but every passionate spiritual leader is a passionate spiritual disciple. And we are not always leading, but ideally we are always in the process of being held accountable and growing missionally, relationally, and spiritually. So that's key to the vision that we have. And then if you look under the invitation team vision, it is aligned very much with that of the extended cabinet. Passionate spiritual disciples of Jesus, working in hope-filled unity, transforming the local, regional, and international United Methodist Church and the communities they serve. So that is very similar to the other. So with that vision in mind, some of the concepts I'm going to be talking about are ways to move toward that vision. And as we move toward the vision, then we experience increased hope. We've had a group called SLI working with the extended cabinet now for over a year. They'll be finishing up with us in December, and we will have had a couple of years and a few months with them. And they have brought to us a process that will continue in terms of our work as leadership far beyond their time with us. We spend 8 hours a month together and as an extended cabinet. And some of you are on district teams that are also spending significant time utilizing these principles. In one of our recent extended cabinet meetings, it was suggested that we share some of these principles and some of these key concepts with you in District Day. Some of you are already experiencing them and know what they are. For some of you, this may be new language. Since it's such a part of the fabric of the leadership, and since it's something that we see being more and more a part of Holston, then we developed this I developed this handout for us, and we'll talk some about the key terms and processes. So, in SLI, it's sometimes called L3, there are 3 principles. One principle is to develop spiritual leaders. That's what we're about, developing spiritual leaders. And I know in your ministry context, you're about that too. We so need spiritual leaders in order to move into the future. We see that the Apostle Paul, he was about developing spiritual leaders too. And he named some of them in his various letters, men and women who he poured into and who he invested himself in so that they could continue to grow the church. But these spiritual leaders are not in any way lone rangers, but rather they model a community that loves, learns, and leads together. And that's where the L3 comes from. Love, learn, and lead. And so every one of our L3 meetings has those 3 components. The loving God and others, the leadership piece, and then the learning piece. We often read books and then discuss them. We will watch videos. We will sometimes do what we call RADs, which is simply an evaluation of an experience we had. So, for instance, right after annual conference, we did a RAD on it to see what went well, what could improve, to review, adjust, and do. That's what RAD means, review, adjust, and do. So the spiritual leaders who model a community, and then to create environments that foster transformation. How many of you have walked into environments that did not foster transformation? I know I've been in those kinds of environments before, and they're okay sometimes. They're not necessarily negative, although sometimes they can be. But at this stage in my life, I'm interested in being in environments that create opportunities for transformation, particularly if I'm going to be spending 8 hours a month with a group of people. I want that to be an environment where transformation can happen. And then the third principle is to establish fruit or processes that bear fruit. So we're not meeting just to be meeting, but we're looking for fruit. And we're looking for quality in terms of the fruit, as well as quantifying it at times. So that's the third practice. So, or principle. So the 3 practices of spiritual leadership, the L3. The first, as I said, is loving. And loving often for us begins with a devotional and then a glory sighting. Now, a glory sighting is simply describing a way in which we have seen God working in our lives, in our churches, in our world. So let me just ask, who has a glory sighting that you'd like to share that you've experienced in the last week? And Jeff will bring this around to you, because I know that many of you could describe it. What's a glory sighting that where you've seen God at work? Okay, here's one.
8 years ago, I was in Central Heights Elementary School, and these 2 kids came in, and they were in my kids' kindergarten class. Little boy saw me, jumps under the desk, shaking like a leaf. Been beat his whole life. He's 5 years old now. Him and his sister had just been sent to courts and picked up by these foster parents. And I kind of followed them through their years, and now they're in the 8th grade. And last Sunday they were at church. They followed me to the current appointment, and after church they want to be baptized, and they want to be baptized in the lake. So they came over to my house last Tuesday. And we went into the lake and were baptized. And my favorite part of the whole thing was I said, "Do you love Jesus?" And both of them were extremely happy. Yes, we love Jesus. And then climbed into the lake and were baptized. And I've been thinking about that since last Sunday and Tuesday with the baptism. You know, 8 years ago when I saw that little kid jump on the desk shaking because he'd been beaten, I never dreamed that that day would come where he wanted to be baptized by me when I scared him so much the first day. I think sometimes we don't see our fruits of showing up at schools, but just by me being at that school on a random day led two kids to accept Jesus. So
Thank you. That is a glory sighting. So, 1, 2, 3. Let's say glory. 1, 2, 3. Glory. Who else? Okay, over here.
The church I serve has a Wednesday programming for youth, and it primarily reaches youth who are low income in our community. So we take our van out and we bring them in on Wednesday. We give them a meal, do some kind of lesson with them. And our church has gone through a lot of turmoil. But this past Wednesday, we tell the children, invite somebody else. And so we had two brand new children with us this last Wednesday. Came and had a great time and said, well, I'm going to tell somebody else about this. So we just raised that up as glory.
1, 2, 3. Glory. There's one back here, Jeff.
We had camp meeting. It's something they'd done historically, hadn't done it several years because of COVID. And our last speaker last week was somebody you may have met recently, if you didn't know him before, Richie Hayes. And Richie did a great job, but the thing that was so good on top of that, my husband was out behind the house, and there were these little boys that we didn't know running their scooters and things down there right before we started. And my husband's kind of a gruff fella, and he said, "Hey, you know," and but come back, we're going to have something. So they came back, and they ran their little scooters down there in the middle of Richie's program, and sat quietly, 3 or 4 of them. And I turned around and said, "Y'all stay for the desserts," and they did. And they came back yesterday, and you know, it was just some kids we didn't know, but I was so grateful that we, you know, were welcoming and wanting them. And today I got a call from a lady who said, "I'm looking for a church, and I've heard you might be good to my kids." So I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but I see things opening up as we are doing.
That's great. 1, 2, 3. Glory. Okay, one more. Okay, over here's one. Jeff. You had to do an about face there, didn't you?
We've recently started, the week of annual conference, actually, a ministry with an addiction clinic across the street, taking a lunch over on Tuesday. The lunch being more a way to break the ice, to begin conversation and offer prayer. And it's just been a beautiful ministry for the patients and the doctors and for us. But recently we prayed with a young man whose wife was in the hospital. They had just gotten married. She had a heart condition. I went to the hospital to visit her after I got off, left the office. A couple of weeks ago, she texted and wanted to just kind of share she'd lost her grandfather. I offered to call, but she was a bit anxious about telephone calls. And she's very fragile herself. But then last week, she texted back and said, "Could we meet for coffee?" And so Thursday, I'm meeting her for coffee because she wants to talk about the Lord. So
1, 2, 3. Glory. And I experienced a couple of glory sightings yesterday. I was in North Alabama last week, and so on Sunday, I was in 2 churches there in North Alabama. One was a church that had a very close disaffiliation vote. They stayed, about 200 of their members left to form a new church down the street. The enthusiasm, the warmth, the intergenerational presence of people in that United Methodist Church yesterday. Just thrilled my heart. And then I went from there to another church that is forming. Their church actually did disaffiliate, and there were about 80 people who desired to stay, and they've grown from 80 to, they had one Sunday, 125, I believe, and we celebrated World Communion Sunday together. They're in a church of another denomination for right now. It was a beautiful, beautiful day, and again, all ages and creative worship, and God's presence was real. So, 1, 2, 3, glory. Okay, so in our meetings, in our leadership meetings, we start with loving, and we will spend an hour or so in devotion time, in asking each other, how's it going with our souls, in glory sightings, and in covenant. And then the second practice that we utilize is the learning, and I've already referenced that, the RAD. We can learn so much, can't we, when we've done something, and to review it, and there are always ways to improve. We're United Methodist, and we believe in sanctification, don't we? And sanctification is the process of becoming more like Christ. So even when an experience is fantastic, it's great to review it and adjust it and do what we can to make it even better next time. Ministry action plans, and I'm not going to go into that today, but that is simply a very succinct way of focusing our vision, our mission, and our strategies toward that mission. And in some ways, the handout that you see has the major elements of a ministry action plan: a vision, a mission, and then strategies to help that vision become a reality. And you can see, for instance, in terms of the mission, the vision is a picture. The mission is the action that moves us toward that picture. And with the invitation team, you heard the vision. You can see that the mission is to help theologically diverse people find meaning in ministry in the hosting conference of the United Methodist Church. That's a worthy mission, isn't it? Hosting is a diverse conference, and there's the opportunity here, more so than in a lot of annual conferences, for us to move forward with traditionalists, centrists, and progressives together. And we also have the opportunity to increase our diversity with ethnicity and in so many other ways. And you have heard me say before that we're better together, and our diversity certainly can sharpen us and stretch us and help us to continue to grow and develop. And then the third practice, as I said, is map creation, and then also communication and next steps. Okay, I've already talked about passionate spiritual disciples. That's huge. That's central to who we are. That's what we're focusing on. We're focusing on developing disciples, and not just introducing people to Christ, but then helping them to grow spiritually, relationally, and missionally. And then the leaders, you heard me talk about that, but the slide after the passionate spiritual leader slide talks about passionate spiritual groups. And you're going to be hearing more about that. Susan Arnold and Congregational Development is helping us to define what a passionate spiritual group is, but you can see some of the elements there. And we look forward to that being a major component in the hosting conference. So if you walk away from here and somebody says, what did y'all talk about today? And you want to give a very succinct answer, 3 things: passionate spiritual disciples, passionate spiritual leaders, and passionate spiritual groups. Does that not sound like early Methodism? I mean, think about it. That is the genius of the Methodist movement in a lot of ways. The class meetings, the band meetings, and the understanding that we grow in community. And then you see some processes of spiritual leadership. There are several of them, and I'm not going to go through all of those. You can see them on your handout. The covenant leading is huge, being in covenant together. So when a group forms, whether it's your church council that's committed to meeting together regularly to love, learn, and lead, or another group, a first action is to develop a covenant. What is our common understanding related to attendance, related to being fully engaged, related to following the meetings, related to confidentiality, all those sorts of things. And then you can see the other, and I've already shared several of those. And the same thing with the mission, the ministry action plan. I'm not going to go over all of that. I do want to say something about teams and work. That's on the 3rd page. And you see HIFAS has influenced some of this. The single biggest failure of leadership is to treat adaptive challenges like technical problems. So here's how I define an adaptive challenge. It's a question that nobody really knows the answer to. And so as a team, we work together to identify potential solutions, to experiment, and to address the challenge. And so the kind of teams that I'm talking about here, that we're talking about in our process here in Houston, starts with adaptive teams. Now, I don't know about you, but I find it much easier and in some ways more fun to tackle technical problems, technical challenges. I mean, you know, it's in some ways, my husband Lee was in camping ministries for a number of years. Jeff, I see you're here. And Lee, on the weekends, in the fall, well, it really wasn't on the weekends because camp ministry always happened on the weekends, but on his day off, which typically was a weekday, would often mow our grass, and he would say, I love to do this because I see the results. I mean, you know, it's like I can in an hour mow this grass, and there's so much seed tossing that we do, and so many responses we make where we don't see immediate results, that to see tangible outcomes can be a gift. And technical problems are important to resolve. I play the piano, not as well as I'm sure some of you, but I do play the piano, and I use the Faber and Faber books, and they have a technique book. That's one of the 4 books that they include. There's a performance book, lesson book, a technique book, and a theory book. And with the technique, there's a technical answer to improve what you're doing. And so you keep practicing it, and there's a how-to and that sort of thing. Technical problems often lend themselves to quick and easy, cut and dried solutions. it can be solved often by an authority or an expert, a piano teacher. In my case, they require change sometimes in just a few places. You do this differently, and you've corrected that technique issue. They're often contained within organizational boundaries. People are generally receptive to technical solutions, and solutions can often be implemented quickly, even by edict. But adaptive challenges are not like that, are they? And you saw on the slide earlier that Chris had up for us. Adaptive challenges are matters like poverty, drug abuse, racial tension, moving forward as a theologically diverse annual conference. Those sorts of matters. And so it's important to have teams that address technical issues. Every church and every ministry context needs that. We also, though, need teams that are addressing adaptive challenges. And so often in the church, we have been primarily focused on technical questions. And we don't want to overlook those, but it's important that we also are working on adaptive challenges. Finding solutions to adaptive challenges requires spending time together. And it requires a lot of creativity and a lot of thinking that is not about fixing things, but rather about how do we move toward this vision. So you see at the bottom of the third page of the flyer, or of the brochure I gave you, team types. There's operational, and that's the adaptive work. There's task teams, and that's the technical work. And then there's directional teams. And annual conference would be a beautiful example of a directional team. Typically, annual conference meets once a year. This year, it met twice here. I have led 5 annual conferences this year. I think once a year is enough. And it sets a direction. It's large groups of people and that sort of thing. Okay, so as I said in the very beginning, I am talking about hope throughout the annual conference this fall. And for hope to abound, we need 3 factors, and I named 2 of them. What's the first one? Vision. It's important to have vision. Loving is a big part of the teams. You're right about that. Vision. And then the second part, pathways. And this describes some of the terminology and some of the concepts that are part of the pathway we're using here in Holston to move toward our vision. And you saw the vision, a conference of pastors, spiritual leaders making disciples of Jesus Christ. And I also shared with you the invitation team vision, which aligns with the conference extended cabinet vision, but it is also has specificity towards its particular task. So, let me ask, do y'all have any questions or comments about what I've shared? How many of you are on an adaptive team? Okay, all right, some of you. How many of you have adaptive teams in your church at this point in time? Okay, some do. Some of you do. Yeah. Yeah. So let me give you an example of the value of an adaptive team in a church. I was serving a church, it was a number of years ago. before I arrived, they had already bought into the idea of having a leadership team that did adaptive work. They didn't yet have that team, and so I had the privilege over a year period of time of selecting, being a part of the selection process for that team and meeting with that team. We met most Tuesday evenings for a couple of hours, and we had the loving, learning, and leading elements. We had done that about 6 months, maybe 9 months. And though I really enjoyed the team, I was starting to question, are we accomplishing anything? I mean, this is a great team, and I really like these people. And I'm growing in my own relationship with Christ, but are we accomplishing anything specific in leading this church? And then a matter was brought before the team related to building a life center. And in this particular church, this was the third time this question had come to the team. We talked about it one Tuesday. The next Tuesday, we voted on it. And we then moved into this decision of building a multi-million-dollar life center. And I realized we weren't wasting time at all. We were building trust. We were learning together. And what would have typically taken a year for the church council to process was accomplished in 2 meetings. And then, of course, we still needed to take it before the building and location committee, and there was a church council and all that sort of thing. But the leadership was ready to make that decision just like that. And it was an informed decision because they had done their homework. So that really caused me to be a believer in high-level thinkers on a leadership team that committed to the kind of L3 process I'm describing in place in a local church to help the church make those big picture decisions. Okay. Are there any questions about where we're headed as a hosting conference? Yes. 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 Right. Yes. Right. 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 Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. And the rotation of members is important. And that happens naturally in some ways. So your point is well taken. That it's critical to have movement within the team. Another piece that's critical is that there be regular communication between that team and other leaders in the church and members of the church. The dynamic of a regime is certainly something to be very intentional to avoid. So that's a perceptive question, and is one to really guard against. Yeah. If members feel that they are on the outside and never have an opportunity and will never have an opportunity to be a part of major leadership, then that becomes very unhealthy. Yeah. So thank you for that. Okay. Other questions or comments about this? Well, I want to tell you again and to say to you how much I appreciate each and every one of you. Your ministry is significant. You are making a difference. You're courageous and strong leaders. I know that this has not been an easy year for many of you. It's been a time in our annual conference that's been challenging for all of us. And there's been grief, there's been sadness, even as we experience hope for the future. I am confident that God is working in and through you, and that the hosting conference will continue to be a strong force in the communities, in our geographic area, and in the United Methodist Church. This is a great place to serve. I have had the opportunity to be in a variety of settings, as you know, and I just want to say again to you, there is something very unique and very winsome about the Hosting Conference, and I look forward to what's ahead for this outstanding conference, and you are a big reason for what's unique and wonderful about hosting. We have our challenges, and we're not perfect, but God is in our hearts and is leading us, and as we follow the triune God into the future, then we can be sure that there are amazing opportunities and ministries ahead of us. Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Bishop. Thank you for coming. And I'll just let you know a little bit about where we're at in both districts with SLI. The Appalachian District started this process in September of last year. And I started to say we finished the process. You never finish the process because you always come back and do a RAD, reflect and just and do. And we're going to be meeting again here in a few weeks. Let you know where we're at on that. The Three Rivers District, we started, we've had 3 meetings, SLI meetings with the leadership team. The 4th one's coming up here soon. And we're going to meet through, I think, once in October and the end of November, then we'll start back up in January. December's a little bit difficult month for us to meet for pastors, I know that, so we'll take December off. But these passionate spiritual communities is certainly something we're going to be pushing in both districts. Now, Appalachian District, Richie and Stephen are going to be in contact with you. We want to define the groups that are already meeting and see if we can give you some information about what we're looking at. And that's up to you, however you adjust this. This is not a mandatory thing, but it's a great thing for your personal, emotional health, your spiritual health, to be in a support group with brothers and sisters in Christ that you can share openly your concerns. And no one understands what you're going through better than the person sitting next to you. The people in the pew don't quite understand on the level that you understand. The love that you have for God, the love you have for your people, and the passion you have for them. But the pastor sitting next to you knows better. And so it's important for us to work together in these small groups. It's very important. And so we'll be working on that. Now in the Three Rivers District, we're just getting started. The first few weeks or few meetings, it's really about laying a foundation of vocabulary, understanding what the process is and that kind of thing. So we're still at work on that. But I'll be, if you're praying about, could I be a person who could be involved in passionate spiritual communities, then I'd love for you to talk to me or talk to Richie, either one. We'll be glad to talk to you about that. But I think that's an important aspect. And the more, and I told in a extended cabinet meeting, I told one of them, there's one person that's kind of the leader of this process as pastor in spiritual communities. I said, the more you talk about this, the more excited you're getting me. Because I think it's important for us to support each other, especially during what we've been through. Between COVID and disaffiliation, it's very important for us to be supportive of one another. And I'm so grateful today that you're still here and that you're with us today. All right. All right. Let us have prayer. Oh, loving God, we're so grateful for your presence in our life, and teach us to be not just passionate spiritual disciples, but passionate spiritual leaders. Teach us that we need accountability in our lives. We need the support of fellow clergy and lay people as well. And I pray that you lead, guide, and direct us. Raise up leaders who are willing to step out and provide leadership in small communities, these passionate spiritual communities, provide leadership in their churches and for the laity, and I just trust you for this, and pray your blessings again on all these wonderful pastors and their churches. And everyone said, amen. And I'll see you tonight in the sanctuary at 6:30 tonight. Amen. Thank you.